One for Mum, one for Dad, one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be in Australia.
Dead, buried, cremated.
Australia's basically done for. We'll just end up being a third-rate economy. You know, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money's Summer Special Series. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute. And if you're taking a break this summer, but you're still craving a political fix, we are here to help, giving you the best of from the Australia Institute's popular Politics in the Pub events and other live events from 2018. Here at Follow the Money, we try to demystify economics and put it in plain English. So we could not be more delighted to bring you Nobel laureate economist and winner of the 2018 Sydney Peace Prize, Professor Joseph Stiglitz. The shift in mainstream economic thinking around inequality is one of the defining public policy discussions of our age. And Professor Stiglitz has been at the centre of this global shift in economic orthodoxy. This audio was recorded live at the Australia Institute offices at the Level in Manuka on the 14th of November 2018. And I can't really do a better job of explaining the impact of Professor Stiglitz's work than the Australia Institute's Executive Director, Ben Oquist. So I'll let him take it from here.
Welcome to the Level here at Endeavour House, the home of the Australia Institute. The Level is a centre for civil society organisations and progressive businesses, being located right here in the heart of our democracy, where a large part of the Fourth Estate reside to, not far away. The public service is located not far, and our federal politicians obviously assemble nearby. This gives the centre and the Australia Institute and those wanting to make a difference and a louder voice on the capital be able to do so. Professor Stiglitz is a giant of the economics profession. He has won a Nobel Prize. He's been chief economist at the World Bank. He's also a former member and chair of the US President's Council of Economic Advisors. I presume not the current one.
He didn't even ask me.
But yeah, indeed, there are a few people who could probably benefit more than the current president from Professor Stiglitz's wisdom. Most importantly, Professor Stiglitz has undertaken world-leading economic research on the causes and cures for inequality. Professor Stiglitz has also been at the centre of a global shift in how we think about economics itself. His research has given firepower to the progressive side to push back against the neoliberal agenda, or what he calls free market fundamentalists. As you know, economics has traditionally been the domain of the conservative side of politics. They have spent decades using economic-sounding arguments to inject their own ideology into the policy debate. They have convinced policymakers that lower taxes, less government services and less regulation benefits everyone, not just the wealthy. Professor Stiglitz's research has shown that market failure exists in virtually every market, and this has meant that we actually need to look at a much larger role for government than neoliberalism would have you believe. He has proved that government intervention in our economy can lead to more efficient economic outcomes, and, to put it simply, that the fight against inequality is not just good for our soul, but it's also good for our economy. The job of economists and policymakers is not to debate if government intervention is necessary, but to work out when it is needed. The real debate today is about finding the right balance between the market and government. Both are needed. They can each complement each other. This balance will differ from time to time and place to place. And that is exactly what the Australia Institute has been doing, if you don't mind me saying. We have been arming the progressive side of politics in Australia with the economic arguments to push back against neoliberalism and their small government agenda. This has been made possible by the world-leading research and ideas from Professor Stiglitz. And indeed, I was just discussing today how important his economic arguments were in pushing back against the company tax cut in Australia. And it was that evidence that was able to shift the public debate in Australia and ultimately shift the votes of the parliament so that that company tax cut was defeated. Anyway, that's why I'm so excited to introduce to you tonight Professor Joseph Stiglitz.
It's a pleasure to be back in Canberra again and to be among so many old friends, and especially in a place where there is a healthy debate going on about these issues. For American, this is a really depressing time, and what I've just heard is the first argument in favor of the Trump tax cut. I don't call it a tax cut because actually a majority of the middle class, a majority of the people in the second, third, and fourth quintiles will actually have their taxes increased in order to finance a tax cut for the billionaires and the corporations. In a country where there's the highest level of inequality, it will result in between 13 and 30 million Americans going without health insurance. In a country where life expectancy is on decline. Not because we don't have knowledge about what to do, but because we don't have a healthcare system that works. So the argument you gave was that we have sacrificed ourselves so that you have the evidence to know that a corporate income tax is a really stupid thing to do. So it's the first argument I've heard in favor of what we did. And it's always nice to know self-sacrifice has some benefit. And it's the only argument I have heard. As many of you know, I've been concerned about inequality for a very, very long time. I grew up in Gary, Indiana, which is an industrial town on the southern shore of Lake Michigan. It was founded in 1906 as the largest integrated steel mill in the world, and it experienced the history of industrialization and deindustrialization. And I grew up at I didn't realize it at the time, the golden era of capitalism, when things were supposed to be as good as the market economy got. But as I was growing up, what I saw was huge inequalities, massive discrimination, labor conflict, episodic unemployment. And while I had intended to become a theoretical physicist, after a few years of college, these problems that I saw just kept gnawing at me, and I went and became, I gave up a good life to be a theoretical physicist to become an economist. At the time, one of the ideas that was very common in economics was stylized facts that we had to explain, was that income distribution didn't change. It sounds, I saw somebody raise their eyebrows. The fact was that for a long period of time, there had been actually relative stability of the income distribution. And we all wrote down theoretical models explaining why income distribution didn't change. But of course, as soon as we finished writing those models down, income distribution started to change. And inequality started to increase. So I entered, as I said, it turned out to be the golden age of capitalism, beginning around the late 70s, early 80s, the era of Reagan and Thatcher. Without anybody really noticing, inequality started to grow and grow and grow very slowly, and not every year, until we have the level of inequalities that we have today, which are as high as they were in the Gilded Age in the United States at the end of the 19th century, that led to the progressive era of antitrust, then a little later to the New Deal and Social Security, labor relations, the Wagner Act that gave workers the right to bargain. So we're back in the United States at the historically high level of inequality. That leads to the question is why do we have so much inequality? And one of the chapters of my thesis, I developed a general theory of this, which is still, I think, probably the best paper on the subject. And but basically, it describes inequality as a balancing of centrifugal forces that are pulling the economy apart and centripetal forces that are bringing us together. And one of the things that has changed is the balance of those centrifugal and centripetal forces have changed over the last 40 years. And so what has happened is the forces pulling us together have weakened, and the forces pulling us apart have strengthened. And the net result of that is that we're moving to a situation where we have growing more and more inequality. And the question then is, why has this happened? Well, I wrote my original study. I published my original study in a place called Econometrica, which I'm sure not many of you read. When I turned to the question again a few years ago, as I saw the level of inequality rising, I wrote an article called Of the 1%, For the 1%, and By the 1%. But I decided to publish that instead in Vanity Fair. And that got somewhat more readership than Econometrica did. So it shows you, it does make a difference. In fact, it went viral. And the title, many of you may not know, it was echoing one of the most famous addresses of Abraham Lincoln in the middle of the Civil War in the United States, where he was trying, it's called the Gettysburg Address, where in a very, you might say, American-century way, he was trying to explain why we were fighting that war and why so many people were sacrificing their lives. And what he said, so that government of the people, for the people, and by the people will not perish from this earth. And the point is, it has perished from the United States. We have a government of the 1%, for the 1%, and by the 1%. And the issues that we're facing today are issues not only of economics, but of politics. It's related to the issue of inequality in the following way. If we look around the world, what we see is that there are the same global forces in all the advanced countries. Technological change, globalization. These are present everywhere. Ideas spread, open markets. And yet, in spite of that, there are huge differences across countries. The Scandinavian countries have a much lower level of inequality. The United States has the highest level of inequality. And equally disturbing, when I talk about inequality, it's inequality of income, it's inequality of wealth, it's inequality of health in the United States. But one of the most invidious aspects is inequality of opportunity. There's a very strong correlation between inequality of income and wealth and inequality of opportunity. So the United States is, among the advanced countries, one of the countries with the lowest level of equality of opportunity. So you all know about the American dream and everybody can make it. The reason that newspapers write about stories of people that make it from the bottom to the top is it's unusual. It doesn't happen. The American dream is a myth. And when I say that, how do economists look at this? It's very simple. Or social scientists, what are the life prospects, the probabilities? And the life prospects of a young American are more dependent on the income and education of his parents than in almost any other advanced country. So that's why I've said to my students, there's one important decision you have to make in life, and that is choosing the right parents. And if you mess up on that, the game is over. It's a pretty dismal view of the world, but unfortunately, it captures too much of the truth. Today, parents looking at their children say that only 37% of Americans believe their children are going to be as well off or better off than they are, which means the vast majority of Americans think that things are going to get worse. And the data are consistent with that 50% of Americans today, you have a high probability of the incomes going down. And the reason for all this, why is it that there are these huge differences across countries in inequalities and equalities of opportunity? It's a matter of choice. not a conscious choice. I mean, obviously the people at the bottom haven't chosen these rules, but when you have a politics of the 1% and you have a political system that gives so much power to money, you wind up with an economic system that has rules that favor those at the top. And unfortunately, America has too much influence in the world. And other countries have looked up to the United States and say, look at the GDP. What they haven't realized is GDP may be going up, but most Americans' incomes have stagnated. The real wages at the bottom, wages adjusted for inflation, are the same today as they were 60 years ago in the United States. Can you imagine not getting a pay raise for 60 years? Median income of a full-time male worker, and the full-time workers are the lucky ones, 20% of American males can't get a full-time job. The median income of a full-time male worker is the same as it was 42 years ago. So that tells you a little bit about what is going on in the politics of America. It is showing up in our health. I talked about the declining health, declining life expectancy. What is particularly disturbing results from ANCASE and Angus Deaton. Angus Deaton got the Nobel Prize in 2015. And what they've shown is the soaring rates of death, of what they call deaths of despair. It's not diseases of the usual kind. It's people giving up. Suicide, alcoholism, drug overdose, social diseases. And the only time I've seen anything like that was when I was chief economist of the World Bank. And we have seen these market fundamentalist ideas applied to Russia, lead to data suggesting that incomes in Russia were going down by a third. You know, after all, capitalism was supposed to bring higher incomes. You know, you're getting rid of central planning, getting systems of incentives, and we replaced it by a foolish set of ideas called neoliberalism, and incomes went down a third from the low levels that they had under communism. And we couldn't believe the data. You know, you just couldn't believe it until we started getting data on demography. And life expectancy was going down. And it was the same kind of deaths of despair. Same, again, mostly males, or disproportionately males. And the outcome. And so what I saw, the data that I looked at in the United States post-2015, looks like Russia, a country falling apart. I don't want to be too negative, but it's what you see, particularly in those parts. And if you do what's called a heat map of the United States, you can see where in the United States there are more of these deaths of despair, and they are where the supporters of Trump are. And the correlation is just so clear between our failure to address the problems of inequality and the problems of the people whose income are going down, and the politics. Now, that politics has become extraordinarily ugly. It won't help the people who are suffering. He's a demagogue. He has recognized a problem and exploited it. And that raises the question of, or makes the imperative of the progressive agenda of how do we have a democratic, a progressive agenda to address these problems of inequality. That's a big issue, obviously. I encourage you to buy my book, The Price of Inequality, and the book, The Great Divide, which describes the growing divide in the United States. But there are a couple of ideas that I just want to just list, and then I'll stop. The first is, I said the underlying problem is the way the rules of the market economy have been rewritten over the last 40 years. Weakening antitrust, enforcement of competition law, weakening unions, making it difficult collective action, weakening the power of consumers by allowing arbitration clauses to be put into every contract, weakening corporate governance so that the CEOs can take a larger and larger fraction of corporate income, bankruptcy laws that give first claim on the assets of a corporation that goes indebted to derivatives, those risky products that led to the 2008 crisis, and making students' debt non-dischargeable, even in bankruptcy. So, simple rules like this really have consequences, and they lead to greater inequality. So there's a whole agenda that we have of trying to rewrite the rules. There's a book that I've done with the Roosevelt Institute called Rewriting the Rules of the American Economy. And there's a book that's come out now in South Korea called Rewriting the Rules of South Korea. There's a book that the social democratic parties are coming out with in Europe called Rewriting the Rules of Europe, trying to identify what are the particular rules in each of our countries which have had the most negative effects, both on inequality but also on economic growth. And how do we reform them in the 21st century? You can't go back to 1980. You need new rules. So that's one part of it. A second part is restoring opportunity and recognizing that the link between equality of outcome and equality of opportunity is so close that you can't address one without addressing the other. In America, 20% of our children are growing up in poverty. Without adequate nutrition, 1 out of 7 Americans go to bed hungry on a regular basis, not because they're on a diet, because they don't have enough food. And that in spite of the fact that 1 out of 7 Americans are on food stamps, getting government assistance, but it's just not enough. So ensuring opportunity, and that includes rethinking education from the beginning to the end. Preschool education. Australia has really pioneered income contingent loans. That makes a big difference of access. Our students face a choice. They know that if they don't get a college education, their prospects are really dismal. Wages of those who do not have college degrees have been plummeting. But if their parents are not, if they made that wrong choice and chose parents who are not wealthy, the only way they can afford college is to get into debt. And that debt is not income contingent, and it is a noose around their neck, and is become a major political issue in the United States. The third thing, obviously, we have to do is invest. And that's part of a broader issue that was mentioned in the introduction. When I say invest, public investment. And to realize that's just one aspect of the importance of collective action. When we have a hurricane, we turn to government. When we have a flood, we turn to government. And yet, when we want to do something like climate change, to prevent those man-made events that are events that are a result of climate change, people say we shouldn't intervene. The government shouldn't intervene in the market. Well, we know that pollution puts at risk our lives. But it's more than that. The foundations of our progress over the last 250 years, why do we live so much better than people 250 years ago? For centuries before that, there was almost no change in standards of living. If you look at a chart of looks at the data, obviously data from 1,000 years ago are not quite as good as data today, but it almost doesn't change at all. And there's a little bit of ups and downs that reinforces our belief that data may be right. Like the Black Plague, you eliminate a third of the population. Guess what? The wages do go up. So we can see that, but they're basically stagnant for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years until the latter part of the 18th century. And it was the Enlightenment, the discovery of the scientific method and the discovery of ways of organizing society, rule of law, democracy, checks and balances, all these ways of social organization that really enable us to work together collectively. But science, basic science, requires public support. The private sector will never do adequate basic science. And all of our progress really rests on the foundation on these two foundations. And this is what Trump is trying to destroy. And that requires, all these things require collective action and working together. So just let me conclude. What is at stake? You know, I've tried to describe very few elements of what I think of as a progressive agenda. I think the progressives do have a positive agenda. You know, people say, well, the Democrats don't have any answer except against Trump. I think that's totally wrong. I think we do know how to create a shared prosperity that's sustainable and which is a real prosperity. And I think the real danger of Trump and similar forces around the world is they are destroying the basis of our civilization, our epistemology, which is how do we tell the truth. They are destroying the foundations on which our prosperity rests. So the risks, and they are destroying the foundations of our democracy. So what is at stake here is the United States has always been the leader. It has led in the growth of inequality. Unfortunately, it is now leading in the growth of illiberal democracies and neo-fascism. And it is important that this battle be fought everywhere and to show that there is an alternative way, an alternative world, another world is possible, and that there is a way of people working together, maintaining their individuality and their individual creativity, but in which, in a shared prosperity, everybody could be better off than in the alternative that they are offering. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Stiglitz. A wonderful address. And for those who didn't see it, an inspirational discussion at the Press Club today. Go and catch it on iView. The ballast you have put under the progressive economic debate in Australia today, some arguments we've heard before, some arguments we haven't. But what happened today was something special in Canberra, I think, that some real architecture and structure and, as I said, ballast put in the economic debate in Australia that's much needed. At a critical point in the debate, I think post the company tax cut defeat leading into the next election, when some of these things are very contested. Your ability to bring together hard data and fantastic polemic, as you've heard here tonight, makes you one of a kind. To be reminded, of course, of the 1% and where that came from, and to think how that shifted economic discourse and language, not just in the States, around the globe. You deserve a Nobel Peace Prize just for that. But maybe that's next. One for economics and one for peace.
I hate to mention it, but I was on the IPCC, one of the lead authors of the 1995 IPCC that shared the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize with Al Gore. So actually, yeah.
A really important intervention into Australia's political and economic debate today, and I know you've got more to come. Just want you to know from the Australia Institute, from me, and from a lot of people in Australia, how much it means and how very important it is right now to the economic and political debate. And I know your trip has already made a big difference and it's going to continue to do so. We really appreciate it, and thank you for coming. Finally, thanks to all those at the Australia Institute who have made tonight possible and this trip, particular to Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director, Anna Chang. I mentioned Jim Stanford and the Centre for Future Work in particular, but everybody involved at the Australia Institute, and particularly Kathy, who has worked so hard to make it all happen. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Kathy.
That's a summer special episode of Follow the Money, brought to you by the Australia Institute. A very big thank you to Professor Joseph Stiglitz. You can follow him at Joseph E. Stiglitz. You can find the Australia Institute on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. Ben is at Ben Oquist, and you can find me at Ebony_Bennett with a N_T. The Australia Institute and Centre for Future Work brought Joseph Stiglitz to Canberra as an impact partner of the 2018 Sydney Peace Prize. If you live in or are visiting Canberra and want to come to Politics in the Pub, sign up to our mailing list at tai.org.au. Listen free to Follow the Money wherever you download your favourite podcasts. This event was recorded live by Clayton McDonald. This episode was produced by Jennifer Macy with additional editing by Renee Sant. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum. You can find more of his music at pulseandthrum.com. Thanks for listening.